something relatively unique in that we are not trying to disrupt governments. We're not trying to disrupt central banks. We're working with governments and with central banks. Once you explain to regulators, customers, and say, the scary part of the crypto isn't really scary. You're going from a KYC'd account in euro denominations to a KYC'd account in Mexican peso denominations, both regulated endpoints. You're not circumventing any regulation. Each transaction is being checked for AML, various acronyms that many people at Money 2020 know well.
So do you think then that banks will get more and more comfortable with XRP over time? Is anybody actively live using XRP that is a regulated bank that you could give as an example to the audience of there is a business case here for using this stuff?
Well, so we publicly shared that we're working with a number of payment providers. I think we announced 7 different payment providers using XRapid today. Names like Western Union and MoneyGram that are piloting this and demonstrating. We're seeing a savings between 40 and 70% compared to their existing cost structure. So when people ask me, are banks, not just payment providers, going to use these technologies? I usually start with just banks are capitalistic organizations. If you can give them a better product at a lower price, the question would be, why wouldn't they use it?
Well, I wonder if there's something about the comfortable existing environment in which you have these flow monsters who control the major currency pairs and the major corridors. What is their incentive to change?
Well, the flow monsters, using your word, yes. Many people ask me, well, wait a minute, I thought banks make money from these transactions. And that is true. However, it's a very small percentage of banks that sit at the top of that oligopoly.
Yes.
And there are banks that, some of them you used to work for, HSBC or Citi, some of the biggest of the big. Last year, I think Citi's profits from cross-border transactions as one of the largest liquidity providers on the planet was around $6 billion US. That's real money. Now, That's coming from other banks. Other banks are paying Citi to enable their liquidity, to take advantage of Citi's very broad nostra-vostra relationships, such that they can fund liquidity into Mexico or Argentina or the Philippines.
So if we could get to the point where XRP is something that we could imagine our compliance team signing off on, and we can get the regulators there, which I think is arguably starting to happen, the next question comes isn't this a very centralized network? Why are you using DLT in the first place? Why are you using blockchain? If it's just Ripple I'm buying the product from, and Ripple are the people operating most of the network, surely then you might as well have just built Google payment system, right?
Right. Well, back to the difference between XRP, the XRP ledger, and Ripple, the company. The XRP ledger is an open source technology, and we don't control it. Ripple is a vertical company building upon that XRP ledger.
You say you don't control it, but you run most of it, right? And is that ever going to change?
Well, we already don't run most of it today. And there are more and more validators that run across the network.
Jargon check. Validators?
Validators are the kind of infrastructure for how the XRP ledger verifies transactions.
Got it.
One of the big differences between the XRP ledger and a Bitcoin ledger is the idea of proof of work as opposed to consensus, which I'll maybe gloss over for simplicity. The big difference there being kind of driven by power consumption and the ability to scale very, very, I think I said earlier, an XRP transaction is about 1,000 times faster than a Bitcoin transaction and 1,000 times cheaper than a Bitcoin transaction.
That's pretty good going. So if we're in a position now where, okay, we can see that the compliance teams might sign off on it, and it's arguably not as centralized as it used to be, how do you incentivize people to start working with this technology? I think you had an announcement about academia.
We do have an announcement today, which we haven't yet shared publicly. Ripple is announcing today that we're working with 17 universities around the world, and we're contributing $50 million to fund the development, to fund the research around blockchain technologies. These universities range from right here in the Netherlands, University of Delft, as well as in London, UCL, Princeton, University of Pennsylvania, Wharton, and we're working these universities around the world to not just further what we're doing with XRP, but really the entire ecosystem. I think Ripple has tried to foster a dynamic where there are going to be many, many, many different solutions in this space, and all boats can rise. By contributing $50 million to these 17 universities globally, we think we can continue to build towards that.
I think that's an interesting tack that I'm seeing a number of large organizations now that have had their own digital asset make some money now go and launch a fund. We saw Binance and several others have started to do the same. Sort of what do you see coming out of these sorts of initiatives with academia and the accelerators? Is this really to grow an ecosystem around it, and is it just for small companies, or can anyone get involved?
Well, I think you're seeing any company get involved. I mean, it is very broad, I think, at this point. And I think the reason for this is what we talked about earlier. We're at the almost embryonic stage of an entirely new platform. And some of the technologies we talk about today, I think in the future, we'll think about them the way we think about TCP/IP or SMTP. And these are technologies that fundamentally enable a whole bunch of different kinds of transactions. And I think all of those across the board can make our global financial system far more efficient. And frankly, one of the things I get excited about is when we talk about these payments, the people who are taxed the most for remittances are the people who can least afford to pay it. And so when I think about what Ripple's technology is enabling, it's exposing people in unbanked community to solutions that they can actually start to afford and participate in the global financial ecosystem.
If anybody hasn't seen it, look up Mojaloop, a really interesting project done by the Gates Foundation, working with telcos in, I think it's in the sub-Saharan African region, trying to work with Interledger protocol, which I think is sort of an open source protocol that you guys kind of put out into the open and said, let's get the interoperability between these telcos working, and then someday later we'll think about it if Ripple makes sense for them. So you find yourself in this interesting world with kind of one foot in the crypto asset space, with one foot in financial services. But it's fair to say, looking at the last report that came out from yourselves, I think it was Q1, $170 million made from selling XRP. Arguably, once you guys sold it, it was then on secondary markets in sort of crypto asset exchanges and cryptocurrency exchanges. Can you see why a bank might look at that and go, well, if I have to use this ledger and this asset, am I going to have price stability in this asset? Is it being sold to retail investors? And not that you guys are doing it, but is it being sold to them? Is there a challenge there that you think? And how would you kind of overcome that?
Well, I think one of the first misinformations that I often overcome when we're talking about how XRapid can be used. There's something going on back there.
Yeah, no, XRapid can be used. Well, let's get down.
Is this idea of, hey, there's too much volatility for it to solve a real banking problem. And it turns out that there's more volatility risk using Swift over that 180,000 seconds than there is using XRP over 3 seconds. And the reason is because volatility is a function of both time and volatility. And so while XRP is clearly more volatile than fiat today, it doesn't actually have the volatility risk over it because it's so fast. So I think, again, it's one of those pieces that I think is often misinformation, that it's not a real factor right now.
Which is a solid answer. And then the optics around, yes, you've committed publicly and transparently disclosing how you're selling all this XRP you were gifted. But if that's, should mom and pop be buying XRP, or is this for professional investors?
We are focused very much on solving an institutional problem. I think from the earliest days of Ripple, we've looked at, our core customer is a bank. You and I talked about earlier, one of the most prominent kind of events we attend each year is Sibos. Yeah. And Sibos is, I'm sure Money 2020 knows well, right? And, we're trying to solve that institutional problem. Clearly, you have speculative interest in what people are doing across the XRP ecosystem and others, and so they want to participate in that. We care about liquidity. The most important thing for us as we think about the success of our products is the liquidity that, if you're going to use XRapid and there's no liquidity between XRP and a Philippine peso, well, that's a problem. So we think about how do we enable liquidity, working with market makers, bringing institutions to bear to really get that flywheel moving. It benefits from both institutional capital as well as the speculator that participates. I will also just digress briefly. I think it's interesting to note that 2 years ago, the crypto community was really talking a lot about, the usage of anonymous transactions for enabling drugs, what have you, in Silk Road. Today, we've actually come a long way, and now we're talking about the speculative interest. Now, on one hand, I wish that we could keep going to that, hey, let's solve real problems for real customers. We're getting there. We've come a long way from Silk Road.
it's a long way in front of us as well, I'm sure, but it's really interesting that this is kind of all starting to come together with your announcement today of funding academia, because maybe that professional researcher piece has kind of been missing. But we're up against it on time, so before I let this audience go, and thank you, would you remind us where we can find out more about Ripple and yourself?
Ripple.com is probably the best place to find it. As I said, the announcement we made today with academia, there are 4,500 job openings today on LinkedIn using, in other words, blockchain or crypto. We think this really is the workforce of the future, and we're excited to be able to work with universities around the world to catalyze that.
Garlinghouse, CEO of Ripple. Thank you
very much.